In 2022 and 2023, China was buying more than 6 million tons of Australian wheat a year. In 2025, that fell to just over 1 million tons. That is not a seasonal adjustment. It is the near total loss of one of the biggest single buyers of Australian grain, and the consequences are now moving through the system, from port logistics and farmgate pricing to on-farm storage, and the long-term planning of broadacre cropping operations from the WA wheat belt to the northern plains of New South Wales. If you grow wheat in this country, or you live in a town that depends on the people who do, this affects you directly. In late 2023, Chinese buyers booked large volumes of Australian wheat at prices that were roughly $70 per ton higher than where the market would settle just months later. By early 2024, those contracts began to unravel. In March that year, Reuters reported, citing unnamed trade sources, that Chinese importers had canceled or postponed around 1 million tons of Australian wheat cargoes scheduled for shipment between February and April. Australian industry sources disputed that figure. Grain Central reported the actual cancellations were likely closer to 1/10 of the stated volume, with the rest being deferrals rather than outright cancellations. One source told Grain Central that a couple of cancellations had occurred, but the tonnage was resold quickly and that the scale had been exaggerated. Another source pointed out the Chinese had bought when the market was $70 per ton higher in November and December and were now prepared to pay cancellation fees to rebuy at lower levels. Regardless of the precise tonnage, the pace of Chinese buying slowed sharply and never recovered. Grain analyst Andrew Whitelaw, writing at Episode 3 in January 2026 and drawing on Australian Bureau of Statistics shipping data, confirmed that wheat exports to China fell to just over 1 million tons across the full calendar year of 2025. That compares to more than 6 million tons in each of 2022 and 2023, and more than 3 million tons in 2024. Whitelaw described it as one of the lowest volumes shipped to China in the past decade, comparable only to the drought years of 2018 and 2019, when Australia's price basis rose to premiums that made our grain uncompetitive. This was not confined to Australia. China pulled back from wheat imports across all origins. In the same period, the USDA reported that China canceled over 504,000 tons of U.S. wheat purchases, the largest single cancellation since 1999. France and Canada were also affected. China was retreating from the global wheat market, not singling out any one supplier. Several forces drove the retreat, and they reinforced each other. China grew more wheat than it ever has. According to the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service and China's National Bureau of Statistics, Chinese wheat production reached a projected record of 140.1 million tons in marketing year 2024 to 25, a 2.6% increase year on year. Yields improved to 5.94 tons per hectare across a planted area of roughly 23.6 million hectares. The gains came from better seasonal conditions and farming practices, not expanded acreage. China also passed its first food security law, which took effect on the 1st of June 2024. The law codified what had been policy guidance for years, mandating what Beijing described as absolute self-sufficiency in staple grains for food use. Passed by the National People's Congress Standing Committee in December 2023, just 6 months after its first reading, the law holds central and provincial governments legally accountable for food security in their development plans. It protects farmland from conversion, supports germplasm resources, and imposes fines of up to 2 million yuan on entities that breach its provisions. On top of that, China's state grain reserves are full. A March 2026 USDA FAS assessment from Beijing, citing industry sources, reported that China's reserve silos are filled and there is no need to import grain for at least 2 years. That claim comes from unnamed industry sources rather than confirmed policy, but the broader data supports it. China reportedly holds around half of the world's total grain reserves. By late 2024, domestic wheat prices had fallen to around $333 per ton, or roughly 536 Australian dollars. In some regions, prices dipped below the government's minimum support price, and the state purchaser Sinograin was reportedly prepared to buy up to 10 million tons for reserves at a slightly higher price to support domestic growers. Low corn prices inside China further reduced the incentive to use wheat in livestock feed. The FAS forecast wheat feed demand would fall by 4 million tons in marketing year 2024 to 25, as cheaper corn displaced wheat in feed rations. Taken together, China's total wheat imports dropped by around 70%, from 13.6 million tons the previous season to roughly 4 million tons. U.S. Wheat Associates confirmed that figure in August 2025. The USDA's March 2025 wheat outlook described Chinese imports as sitting at a 5-year low. For context, Australia's total wheat export value fell from approximately 9.3 billion Australian dollars in 2023 to around 6 billion in 2024, according to Indexbox analysis of UN Comtrade data. China's share of that decline was substantial. The flow-on to Australian growers was direct. By May 2025, Rabobank senior grains and oilseeds analyst Vitor Pistoia, based in Sydney, warned that weak Chinese demand was leaving Australia with too much wheat. He estimated 5 to 6 million tons of carryover from the previous season's crop if the export pace continued. A source, an international grain trader in Australia, put total carryover, including grain from older seasons, as high as 8 million tons. That creates a storage problem. If the next harvest is strong, there is not enough silo space. Growers are forced to sell into the export market at lower prices just to clear room before the new crop comes off. Western Australia, the country's largest wheat exporting state, was among the first to feel it. Trade sources told Grain Central that China had slowed its delivery pace on WA wheat specifically as early as March 2024, and WA's domestic market dropped roughly 30 Australian dollars per tonne in the weeks that followed. Pistoia warned prices could slide toward 300 Australian dollars per tonne, down from a range of 325 to 350 at the time. By mid-September 2025, spot prices had fallen to around 275 Australian dollars per tonne on CBOT and around 300 on the ASX, according to Rabobank figures published through Southern Farming Systems. For growers already facing rising input costs, that price compression hits margins hard. Nitrogen fertilizer in particular has climbed sharply, with the USDA FAS in April 2026 linking the increase to the escalation of the Middle East situation. The cost pressure is changing planting decisions. The FAS reported some farmers are now shifting marginal area away from wheat and canola, which require more nitrogen, toward barley as a lower input alternative. ABARES, in its March 2026 Agricultural Commodities Report, forecast the value of Australian wheat exports would fall 13% to 8.6 billion Australian dollars in 2026 to 27. The drivers are falling production volumes, persistently low global prices, and a rising Australian dollar reducing export competitiveness. National average broadacre farm business profit is forecast to fall from $163,000 to $141,000 in 2026 to 27. That $22,000 decline feeds straight into regional communities through fewer machinery purchases, less spending at local businesses, and tighter household budgets for families dependent on farm income. The global supply picture compounds all of this. Russia exported record volumes of cheap wheat through early 2024, pulling benchmark prices lower worldwide. By February 2025, according to S&P Global Commodity Insights, the price spread between Australian APW wheat and Russian wheat had narrowed to a 3-year low of just $10 per tonne. Argentina posted a 51% production increase. The EU was up 20%. Canada was up 11%. The USDA reported that global ending stocks among major wheat exporters climbed 30% to their highest level since 2009 to 10. Against all of that, there's a genuine counterpoint. Despite losing most of the China wheat trade, Australia's total wheat exports held up. Shipments in 2025 exceeded 24 million tons, a solid year that confirmed Australia's standing as a major global supplier. Indonesia was the leading destination, followed by the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan, and South Korea. Demand from the Middle East and Africa also absorbed supply. Andrew Whitelaw noted that this breadth of demand reduced reliance on China and supported export resilience even as Chinese volumes collapsed. In marketing year 2024 to 25, bulk wheat exports to Indonesia totaled 3.96 million tons, and the Philippines took 3.21 million tons, according to ABS data. Southeast Asian buyers also gain from reduced competition, with S&P Global reporting that Black Sea wheat shipments to the region fell by more than 50% in 2025. The diversification in wheat is real. In barley, it does not exist, and that gap should concern every grain grower in the country. In 2025, Australia shipped just over 6 million tons of barley to China. Japan, the next largest buyer, took under 600,000 tons. China accounted for more than 10 times the volume of the second-ranked destination. That concentration followed China's decision to lift its 80.5% combined tariff on Australian barley in August 2023. Those tariffs, comprising a 73.6% anti-dumping duty and a 6.9% countervailing duty, had been imposed in May 2020. The GRDC estimated they cost the Australian barley industry $2.5 billion Australian dollars over the 5 years they were in place. Prior to the tariffs, China had been Australia's largest barley market, accounting for around 58% of barley exports. Once the tariff came off, Australian barley flooded back into China, and exposure is now greater than it has ever been. Whitelaw described this concentration as placing significant risk in single country, one that could become a serious problem given current geopolitical tensions. The outlook for 2026 to 27 carries further downside. The USDA FAS projects Australian wheat production will fall to 29 million tons, down 19% from the prior year, driven by a forecast reduction in planted area of 600,000 hectares, dry conditions in southern Queensland and northern New South Wales, elevated fertiliser costs, and the potential development of El Niño. ABARES expects much of Australia to receive below-average rainfall during autumn 2026. China has not banned Australian wheat. It has not imposed tariffs. It has grown more of its own, filled its reserves to capacity, passed a law to entrench self-sufficiency, and stopped buying at the volumes Australian growers had come to count on. Australian wheat found other markets across Southeast Asia, North Asia, and the Middle East, and that diversification has held total export volumes together. But the price pressure is real, the carryover burden is real, and the margin squeeze on growers is real. And the barley sector, which flooded back into the Chinese market the moment tariffs were lifted, now sits more exposed to a single buyer than at any point in the past decade. The wheat market absorbed this lesson at considerable cost. Whether barley absorbs it before the next disruption is a question the industry cannot yet answer. Subscribe.